Hi there, thank you all for coming. Just want to introduce myself at the start. My name's Robbie Lumsden. I'm the new librarian for the Faculty of Engineering. So if you do have any queries about library stuff or anything you need to know about resources or any of the things talked about today, and feel free to contact me about them in future. I'll be happy to help with anything with that. I'm here today, well, we're all here today to talk about open access and research data management. So I'm just going to introduce a few of the speakers we've got with you to give you an idea of the day. Today we're going to, first up is Catherine Sharp is going to talk about open access. And then Miriam Falusta-Grist is going to talk about research data management. And then Tom Couch from the Research IT team is going to talk about research IT services. So there'll be time to ask questions and even maybe get answers at the end of the day. So without further ado, I'll pass you over to Catherine, who's going to talk about open access.
Oh, this is flashing red, which is a bad sign, I think. So we'll just substitute it. Okay. Okay, hi everyone. Thanks, Robbie. Yes, I can tell you can hear me because there's this horrible echoing going on in my head, so that's all right. Thank you very much for coming. I'm going to talk about open access to research publications. Miriam's going to talk about data a little bit later on. I manage open access services in UCL Library, and obviously one of the things that we're most concerned about now is the REF open access policy, which I hope everybody has at least heard about, and hopefully you'll go away with a lot more information at the end of this session. So I'll talk very briefly and quickly about the benefits of open access, just to avoid this being all about the requirements and compliance. And I'll run through the types of open access, just in case anybody isn't familiar with them. But do feel free to ask questions, as Robbie said, either at the end or at the end of the whole session. Then I'll talk about research funders' policies and particularly the REF policy, but also the BBSRC policy, which I think perhaps people are a bit more familiar with. And then I'll mention UCL's thesis deposit requirements towards the end, because I know that we've got some people here who that's going to be relevant for. Yeah.
Just a very quick question. Would the slides be available somewhere online?
We'll make sure.
We don't have to take notes.
I'll also have it, it's being recorded, so you'll be able to.
Perfect. Sorry about that.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. And then lastly, I'll show you how you can comply with these requirements, and I'll give you a quick tour of RPS for those who aren't familiar with depositing through RPS. So there's not really much question nowadays, I don't think, amongst researchers and amongst institutions that open access is a good thing, that it increases your citations, that it allows practitioners and those who might otherwise not have access, who don't have access within an institution, to use your articles, your conference papers and so on, that it can influence policymakers, and that really for research funders it's a definite benefit, because the money that they put into research funding is then producing research that's available to the whole world. So open access is generally seen as a good thing, and I think academics generally support that in all sorts of ways. But it can be a very complicated sort of landscape, and just to talk briefly about the different types of open access, which I know sometimes do cause confusion. There are two different types of open access. The one that you're probably most familiar with when you talk to publishers is actually the gold open access option, which is where institutions or researchers pay for open access on the publisher's website for immediate open access. The downside of that is that it is very costly. It usually costs around about £1,500, if not more, to make a paper open access immediately on the publisher's site. So the solution really is the other type of open access, green open access, which involves depositing a researcher's final manuscript in a repository. And by a repository, we mean an institutional repository usually, and UCL Discovery is UCL's institutional repository. Usually the publisher won't allow immediate open access to the manuscript, Although in the case of computer science, quite a lot of publishers do allow that. So ACM and IEEE are two publishers who have very good and liberal open access policies that allow immediate open access to the accepted manuscript in an institutional repository. Other publishers impose an embargo period, so sometimes 6 months, sometimes 12 months, depending on the publisher and depending on the journal often as well. So there are a number of different research funders' open access policies, and I'm not going to go through all of them, but there's a table on our website that shows you all of them. I imagine that EPSRC is going to be relevant to quite a lot of people, though. Is that right? I'm seeing one, not a few nods. Okay. So many of you may already have made your articles open access by using our central EPSRC grant. So what happens with that is that we hold funding from the research councils to pay for gold open access. They prefer gold open access. So we manage the payment. We make sure that the publisher is offering the right license, which is the CC BY license. We make the payment and we upload the published final PDF to the institutional repository, to UCL Discovery. There aren't many other funders who provide us with a central fund. I imagine that the Wellcome Trust is not so relevant to you, but there are a number of biomedical funders who provide us with funds, so just give me a shout at the end if that's relevant to you and we can talk about it separately. There are funds available for fully open access journals, so if you were publishing in a journal where all the papers are open access. These are often more common in biomedicine, but you will find them in computer science as well. Then there's funding available for FP7 funded projects that have closed. Horizon 2020 also has an open access policy, and it requires open access in quite a short period, within 6 months of publication. So again, there's sometimes a need with Horizon 2020 funded papers to pay for open access. Although, as I say, many publishers in computer science do have very good and liberal open access policies for green open access. So just to come on to the main part of today, really, as far as I'm concerned, and this is to talk to you about the REF open access policy. We don't know when the next REF is going to be. People are saying 2021. It may be, it may not be. But what we do know is that there's an open access policy for the next REF, and we know that it's not going to be enough for you to get to 2021 or whenever it is and make sure that your papers comply. Unfortunately, this has to be thought about and done now as you're getting papers accepted. So I suspect that most people in this room will know what the REF is, but just to emphasize to those of you who, well, let's just ask for a show of hands, who doesn't know what the REF is? Is anyone brave enough to put up their hands? Okay, fine. So the REF is vital to institutions, hugely important as far as funding is concerned. I don't need to say any more about that. The requirement then for the REF is that authors deposit their final manuscript, the version after peer review, but before the publisher typesetting, in a repository, and this applies to articles and conference papers. It's best practice that you get it in as soon as possible, so ideally on acceptance, ideally as soon as you know that the paper has been accepted and is proceeding to publication, but certainly no later than 3 months after publication. The problem, or the reason for doing it, is that when you get to REF 2021, non-compliant outputs won't be admissible, won't be able to be submitted to the REF. There is an added requirement, so there's a sort of two-stage requirement. There's the requirement to deposit, and then there's the requirement that the paper is made open access. And that has to happen within 12 months of publication. If your publisher doesn't allow open access within that period or doesn't allow open access at all, then there's an exception in the policy that says that as long as you're publishing the most appropriate journal for the output, it will still be submissible. You can still be submitted to the REF, but you still need to deposit. So whatever happens, if you have a manuscript, as long as you have a manuscript, it must be deposited in UCL Discovery. UCL's policy, it's probably not as relevant to you, but if you're publishing books and book chapters, then the UCL policy is actually that all outputs should be deposited. So book chapters are included in this. It's part of UCL policy, but if you have difficulties depositing book chapters, perhaps because you don't have the right version or whatever, then you can always get in touch with the UCL Discovery team, and they can help with that and advise on that. So just to mention, sometimes people ask about particular exceptions to the policy. If you Google UCL Open Access, you'll find a link to deposit, and you'll also find a link to our FAQs. We're trying to make these as comprehensive but as straightforward as possible. And there are a few that are actually written into the REF policy, a few exceptions written into the REF policy. So I've just mentioned the first one. If your journal doesn't allow open access or doesn't allow it within the 12 months, you still deposit in UCL Discovery and it can still be submitted to the REF. It just stays on closed access. There are a few other exceptions, some of which are not going to be hugely relevant, like third-party content. If you had third-party copyrighted material then that really can't be deposited, then you might well choose to remove it, but if it can't be removed, then it would stay on closed access again. One that might well be relevant to you is if you're a co-author on a paper with the corresponding author at another institution. Obviously, we hope that it won't be too difficult for you to get the manuscript from your corresponding author, but if you have any problems with that, please try. But if you can't, get in touch with us, because there is an exception in the policy if an author can't get hold of their final manuscript. There are other exceptions for authors coming in from another institution, but one of the exceptions, actually one that might be relevant to you, is where depositing the paper presents a security risk. Now, we don't know how this is going to be used really, but if there is confidential information in there, or if there is anything in there that you don't want to be made public for one reason or another, then that would fall within the security risk exception, potentially anyway. So that's available if necessary. They don't expect these exceptions to be used very often, though. And the one that might well be relevant, particularly if you're EPSRC funded and we're paying for gold, is that there's an exception for gold open access. So if we're paying, then we will put the paper into the repository for you, and you don't need to do any more. And it actually falls under this exception in the REF policy. So that's not a problem. I'm going to talk briefly about depositing theses now, because I know that it's, well, just stick your hands up if depositing your thesis is going to be relevant to you at some stage. Yeah, a few people. Okay. So just to go over those requirements, and then I'll show you the link to find out some more about it. So there's a requirement for thesis award that theses are deposited through RPS and UCL Discovery. The objective is to make them open access, so obviously that's the assumption, but in some cases you can request a delay period, an embargo period. So if you want to restrict access because your thesis is going to be published or because it's got commercially sensitive information in there and various other specific reasons, then you can request that when you complete the thesis deposit agreement form, which is what you'll do after the examination and the corrections and just before you upload it to RPS. So you'll create a record for your thesis in RPS. You'll create a final PDF of the thesis itself, and then you'll upload the form and the thesis through RPS to UCL Discovery. There are quite a few guidelines about that online, so I've just given you a link to that there. Perhaps before, what I was going to do next was to show you how to deposit, but perhaps before I do that, are there any particular questions about policies and particularly REF? Yes?
Yes, so in the last few months I published 4 papers, actually clustered together, and I said, okay, let's deposit them also on RPS, and saw some questions arose which are not totally clear to me. So 2 papers were green open access and 2 were gold. So I thought I should submit only the green ones, but I was told, well, it would be better to have a copy of the gold ones in the repository as well.
Yep.
Is this true?
Okay, so the question is, 2 green papers and 2 gold papers. Is it a good idea to deposit the gold papers in UCL Discovery, or do you only have to deposit the green? The answer is that, yes, it's good to have gold papers in the repository. To save you the trouble of doing it, if we've made the payment and you've been talking to us about the payment and so on, then you don't need to do anything with the gold papers. We'll upload them. We might not get them as quickly as you do. They might not appear in the repository as quickly because we don't know when something's been published, so we have to go back and check. But we will put them in eventually. If you want to deposit the gold papers, there's absolutely no problem with that. But as I say, if we've paid for it, we'll do it for you. If another institution paid for them or one of your co-authors paid for them, then we would be grateful if you would upload them, yes, or at least fill in the OA location section that you'll see in RPS.
One is RPS, which is the list of the papers, and one there is the discovery with the deposit. So in the case of the gold, I just filled in RPS and I received an email, why don't you deposit them through, and said, okay.
Yep.
And a similar question arose with the green ones, because usually in the past I would deposit them on Archive.
Yep.
And then I said, okay, I deposit them also on Discovery. And since I had a double affiliation with the LSE, after a few months I received an email from LSE Library, why didn't you deposit this, the source with us? And I said, look, it's also Archive and on
Yep.
UCL. And then
Yep.
they said, yes, but you are affiliated with LSE, so you have to deposit also there. And
Okay, I'm going to try to...
I'm a bit,
Yeah.
I'm uneasy with these multiple copies, because that's
Yes.
really overdoing it.
Yes. Yes. Okay, I'm going to try to remember all of those questions and repeat them to everybody so that it gets captured on the lecture cast, and then I'll try to answer them. These are really interesting questions, actually, and I think they probably affect quite a lot of people, so I'm really glad they've come up now. So the first question was about the difference between UCL Discovery and RPS. RPS is, yes, it's a record of all your papers. It's what feeds into your IRIS profile. So your IRIS profile will contain all the papers that you've put into RPS. So when you create a record for a paper in RPS, and I'll show you that in just a minute, it will feed through to your IRIS profile. But the PDFs don't sit in your IRIS profile. When you, so creating a record in RPS is different from uploading the full text, uploading the manuscript. When you upload the manuscript to RPS, both the manuscript and the information about the paper will go through to UCL Discovery. So that's the difference. And there is a kind of two-stage process. You need the bibliographic information about the paper in RPS, and you also need the full text, the published PDF, the PDF or the Word document of the accepted manuscript. Does that answer the first question? Okay, the second question was about depositing in multiple places. So if you're a researcher depositing in archive, do you also have to deposit in your institutional repository? And if you're a researcher with multiple affiliations, do you have to deposit in both institutional repositories? Now, we are looking at archive, and we're having discussions about how we can help researchers who are used to depositing in archive. So it's something that I'll have some information about in due course, but it's not, I can't promise that depositing in archive is going to be possible. So it's something that we're looking into. The reason that's difficult is that we need to demonstrate to HEFCE, for the next ref, that papers have been deposited in the correct format and that they're deposited within 3 months of publication. And we don't get that information from archive. It doesn't come through to RPS. It isn't even necessarily captured in RPS. So that's a headache for us, but we're looking at how to support researchers with that. So if you're already, can I just ask for a show of hands, actually, who is already depositing in archive? Okay, so it might affect a few people, but perhaps not everybody. It's something that Sarah and I will discuss separately, I think. But we're aware that it's an issue, but it may not be possible to support it, at least immediately. The other question was about if you have multiple affiliations. And I'm afraid that at the moment...
Or if there are multiple authors,
yes.
different affiliations,
Yes.
what is required?
Yes. Yes. Again, institutions have been asking the central bodies to try to, who are kind of responsible for shared services, to try to put a shared service in place that will mean that there isn't this need to deposit in lots of different repositories. But the problem is that every institution needs to demonstrate, as I say, to HEFCE, when it comes to 2021, that this paper belonging to this author was deposited on this date within the requirements. And we can't get that data from other repositories at the moment. We can only get it from our own repository. So, but it won't necessarily come into... I mean, if you think that we're dealing with 12,000 papers a year, we can't go manually through every single one to do that. So at some point there will be some kind of shared service. Ultimately, what we'd like is to be able to get the manuscripts from publishers rather than having to come to you and ask you to do this. But for the moment, it is the case that it has to go into every repository because there's nothing to join them up. We would love it if there were, and it's something that's being worked on, but at the moment there is no solution. And I know that to say that to a group of people like you sounds a bit ridiculous, but that's the story, I'm afraid, in every institution at the moment. Yeah.
In your experience for green access, when there is a limitation to only have a single copy that you share, how actively is that enforced by publishers, for example, the ACM?
What do you mean by how actively is it enforced?
If I want to put it on RPS and my homepage and maybe on archive and maybe somewhere else.
There's no problem with that. Publishers wouldn't have a problem with that. You can deposit. It's not a case of not being able to deposit. You retain the right to deposit in a variety of different places, and that would include subject repositories like archive. It would include institutional repositories and your own website. So it's not a single copy. It's as many copies as you want, but obviously you want to make them. You want to make it the same copy that you deposit, I guess.
The reason I'm asking is because I've heard the limits. I've read the limitation, the constraints. The author is allowed to share a single copy on their homepage.
Let me read the ACM policy again, but I think that might be a question of interpretation. But yeah, get in touch with me. But yes, I think that would be very, very unusual, and I think it's probably the way it's written is not particularly clear. But yeah, I'm going to take a couple more questions now. Then I'm going to show you RPS. Then we can come back to questions, I think, at the end. So yeah.
So if you're a co-author and you're publishing a paper, and then the author, the lead author, doesn't have the funding, or he doesn't want to, or for any reason, he cannot publish it open access.
Well,
what are we doing in that situation?
Well, there's no requirement. This is interesting because this is something that does cause a lot of confusion. The question of funding is only relevant if you're choosing gold open access. So, in order to be able to deposit in a repository, there's no payment required at all.
So we go to the green one directly.
So you go the green route.
After the embargo. But this one would be after
not
the
after the embargo. No. What you would do is, so there's this two-stage thing. You deposit in the repository. That doesn't make it open. You deposit through RPS, which doesn't make it open access at all. It sits on closed access. In fact, what it does is it goes to the UCL discovery team, who look at all the publisher conditions and release it when they can. So it would be after the embargo period. Sometimes there wouldn't be an embargo period. So, so you might, for example, if you're publishing with IEEE, you might, if you were EPSRC funded, you might say, well, actually, I'm going to go gold because the funding is available. But if you're not, if the paper isn't EPSRC funded, rather, you would say, okay, I'm going to go green, I'm going to deposit, and in that case, there wouldn't be an embargo period, so it would be made open access immediately. And when a publisher offers you open access, they're offering you gold open access. They're not talking about green generally at all, because it's not really in their interest. So, so when they offer you paid open access, or when they offer you open access, generally you're going to say no unless you know there's funding available. But that doesn't affect your ability to deposit it. That's part of your rights that you keep when you sign the copyright agreement. Okay. All right, I'm going to show you RPS now for about 2 or 3 minutes, and then we can either come back to a few more questions, or I can hand over to Miriam. We'll see where we get to. Okay. Huh?
That's fine.
Are you okay with that? Okay. Okay. So if you Google UCL Open Access, you get to this page, and what you're looking for, as well as the other information on here, like the funding information, is you're looking for the deposit link on the bottom left, which is the big red link. And that takes you to deposit. And it talks a little bit about what you need to do. So you need the final accepted manuscript, and then it talks about the things that we've covered today. And then you log into RPS through this link. So what you'll have started seeing in RPS, if you've gone into RPS recently, can I just ask who's used RPS or seen RPS before? Okay, so quite a few people haven't. So for those who haven't, if you're a research student or a member of staff, you will have an RPS record. And the important thing with your RPS record is to set up your search settings. Now, I haven't got this shown on this slide, but I'll just describe how RPS works very quickly for those of you who aren't familiar with it. So RPS is the central record for your publications at UCL, and indeed for any publications you want to pull in from anywhere else. So you can pull in other publications that you've had previously. You can just see on the bottom right there, there's a link to My Data Sources. And this is a link to set up RPS to search other databases for your articles. So what you can do is enter any variations of your name under which you publish. So I might enter Sharp Catherine, Sharp CL, Sharp Catherine Louise, any kind of variations, just to make sure that RPS searches for as many different variations as you might publish under. And you can then tell RPS which databases you wanted to search for, that you wanted to search to find your publications. And the options are Web of Science, Scopus, PubMed, and the other relevant one is going to be Archive for you. So what RPS will then do is go off and search those databases and pull in records that match the search terms that you've entered. So just like any search, really, any alert. And it will then say, is this publication yours? And if you claim it, then it appears in your home page. So it appears in this profile here. The problem with this is that it only finds those publications after they've appeared in those databases. And they only appear in those databases after they've been published. So you can see that with the ref requirement to deposit within 3 months of publication, very often papers are not going to appear in RPS soon enough through automated searching. So what you have to do is set up a simple manual record for your publications when they're ideally as soon as possible after acceptance. So you can see that I've got one publication awaiting deposit just towards the top of the screen there. So I could deposit this one, but it may well be that this one is outside the 3-month time period. So if I want to get a new accepted article into RPS, what I'll do is I'll go down to the types. It's either going to be the journal articles that are circled there, or it's going to be the conferences. And I'll click the plus sign next to whichever type is relevant. Obviously, journal articles and conference papers are the ones that are required for the ref, but this is where you deposit other types of publication as well. So then it gives you an option to search for the paper, and this is useful if it's not been added to your profile, but say one of your co-authors at UCL has already added it to RPS. You might want to check that because you don't want duplicate records for the same paper being added to RPS. It also saves you time. So you can search for the paper and it will tell you if it's already in RPS. And you can then claim it, and you can see the claim links on the right-hand side. But if the paper hasn't been added to RPS, or it's not available as a record, then you need to set up a simple record for the paper. So this is the sort of two-stage process again. This first stage is just recording the details of the paper in RPS. And there are a very few things that you have to enter. And I try to make this sound as easy as possible because it really is. It will take you a couple of minutes to do. What it asks you is, what kind of relationship do you have with the article? Are you the author? Are you the editor? Are you the translator? Well, mostly you're going to be the author. It asks you for the journal subtype, for the article subtype. So mostly it's going to be article. Sometimes it might be editorial comment. Sometimes it might be letter. It just depends. But most of the time I think it's going to be a research article. Asks you for the title, obviously. And then the authors. And when you type in the author's details, if you type them in the most sort of appropriate format in which you want them to appear. So if I were typing my own name, I would type Sharp C. And then it will search other authors in RPS for you, and it will suggest if it thinks that you're trying to add somebody who's at UCL. So you can see here, it's added a colleague of mine, and I just need to say, yes, this is the person that I'm wanting to add. It then asks you for the journal, and you can type this in as free text, or you can choose one of the options that it gives you. And actually, sorry. And when you get to that point, you need to add a couple of dates. The dates you need to add are date of acceptance and date of publication. Now, obviously, date of publication is going to be an estimate, but we need that both to record that you've published it, that you've deposited it within the right time period, and for it to display correctly in your IRIS profile. It can be an estimate. It will get updated when the full metadata, when the full data about the paper comes in later on. So you don't need to worry that you're entering something that will be there permanently. It will be updated. The other thing that you need to enter is date of acceptance. Again, the closest to the date of acceptance that you can tell us, an estimate is okay if you're not 100% sure. You then upload the paper. This is where you add the accepted manuscript. You choose accepted version. It's almost certainly going to be accepted version unless it's a paid open access paper. And then you confirm that you're depositing this publication. So that's just a second stage to adding the file. And then you'll see the file appearing in your record in RPS. You can see very small there, the PDF icon showing up there in that record. So I'm going to take a couple of questions about RPS if anybody wants to ask them now. But I think I want to leave time for everybody else. So I'm going to come back later, if necessary, for some more questions. Yeah.
I'm not quite sure what's meant by the final accepted manuscript, because with a lot of journals, when you upload a manuscript, the manuscript file itself is just a text file.
Yes.
And the figures are uploaded as separate
Separately.
files.
Yeah.
And then the system will compile a PDF file of the whole thing, but it also includes the cover letter and responses to reviewers that wouldn't necessarily be appropriate to deposit.
It would tend to be the version before it does that combining. So it would tend to be, you would tend to upload the figures separately.
What, into RPS?
Yeah, as a Word document or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
So you don't have to just upload one single file?
No, you can upload several files if you've got lots of figures and so on. Yeah. Okay. Or you can make, I mean, if you want to, you can make them into a single PDF or whatever yourself. It's up to you. Yeah, you can. Yeah, yeah. As long as it's not got the publisher's formatting on, then that's fine. I mean, sometimes what's called the final manuscript, depending on the publisher's submission system, will be quite similar to the final PDF. So the discovery team, the UCL discovery team, can advise on that if you're not sure what's the right version. But yeah, I mean, it depends a bit on the submission system and how far you can go with a Word document, and at what point you need to pull out an accepted version. But yeah, generally it's a Word document of some sort. Yeah. Yeah.
The final accepted manuscript often gets copy edited by the journal.
Yeah.
Am I supposed to backtrack the copy edits and add them to the final manuscript? Or
Yeah. You don't have to add, you don't have to backtrack, and it would be onerous to do so, but you certainly can if you want to. There's no problem with that. So it's really up to you. I mean, if any changes that happen at that stage are really kind of fairly minor, and it's not something that's going to be too problematical if they're if they're not included in the version that's uploaded, then it's not a problem. But equally, there's no problem with making the changes if you want to.
Immediately on the publisher's webpage.
Okay.
So, what is the publication?
What's the publication date? Okay, so the question then, I'm sorry, I've been forgetting to repeat the questions, but the question there was, what is the publication date? Is it the online publication date, or is it the final publication date in an issue? The answer is that officially in the REF policy, it is the online publication date. But I think in some ways there's room for interpretation, but what we would say is get it in as soon as possible after acceptance. So we can't be 100% definitive about what HEFCE will see as the final publication date, but I think the best advice is treat acceptance as the date from which you start counting, if at all possible. Okay, I'm going to take Miriam. Have I got time for a couple more?
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
Sorry, I happen to be going through a review process at a workshop that has shepherding of papers. So it's been accepted, and they want you to demonstrate you can do some corrections, and then they say, okay, that's now accepted. And then there are other conferences which have a similar thing where there's different stages of acceptance.
Yeah.
So is there any advice on what constitutes acceptance?
It's particular acceptance for a conference, isn't it? Is that what you, yeah?
There's acceptance, and then it's conditional, and then it's more the complication of which version do I say I give access to, if it's undergoing a shepherding.
Okay, so the question is about what constitutes acceptance when it's going through a sort of process of discussion about whether it's going to be accepted or not, I think. Okay, what constitutes the accepted version as well. And this is a publication rather than a conference presentation. Okay, if it's a conference presentation, then it doesn't actually fall within the policy. It's when it's a published conference paper that it falls under the policy. So you can deposit a conference presentation, but you don't have to. So it's really when a conference paper is published afterwards. Does that help at all? Okay, all right, thank you. Okay, I'm going to take one last question, I think, and then I'm going to stop. Yeah.
Can I ask about research notes? In computer science, we've had a history of recording research notes manually outside RPS. So with the new policy, is that now a defunct process?
Okay.
Familiar with what we do?
The question is about research notes, and I'm afraid I don't really understand the question, so I'm going to ask some more information.
Academic staff here can help me explain what.
I think it's like working papers. Working papers?
Working papers that aren't submitted for publication yet, but they want it in a depository somewhere. So we can use RPS for this now?
You certainly can, yes. Yes, you can. Yeah. I mean, I can't show you, but there is an option for that, so to add as a type. So yes, certainly do. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to stop there, but if anybody has any questions, we'll see if there's some time at the end, and I'm going to hand over to Miriam to talk about something different.
Right, sorry, I'm going to hold it. So hello everyone. So I'll talk about something a little bit different, but also connected to publication, so we're not too far from what Catherine has just said. So my name is Miriam. I'm the Research Data Support Officer in UCL, so I work in the library, but I'm also working very closely with the IT department, so with the Research IT Services team. Tom will speak a little bit about it later, but just to tell you that what I'm presenting is really connected to both what we do in the library and the IT services. So I want to speak about research data management and the different policies that you have to comply with nowadays, so mainly UCL and funders policies. And then I'll try and explain the different services that are available for you in UCL to help you manage your data and comply with these policies. So first, I thought I would start with a few definitions so that we all speak about the same thing. So let's start with research data, which is really difficult to define. So we came up with one definition. There could be others. So what are research data? So they are really the original sources that you create or that you use for your research project. You analyze them, and that helps you answer your research questions. So UCL has a definition of research data. So there's a research data policy. Has any of you ever read it or come across it? Oh, thanks, that's great. I'm really happy about that. I'm not surprised that most of you haven't, because it's quite well hidden. You will find it. We have a research data management website. I'll mention it later, but you will find this policy. So you can read the definition. It's just an extract here, just to show you the diversity of research data. It can be digital, but it doesn't have to be digital. That's really important to bear in mind. So among research data, we have simulation data, which I guess can be relevant for a lot of you here. So these are data generated from models such as climate mathematical models, for instance. So your research funder may have its own definition of research data. It's really important to remember. So please, before you apply for a grant, have a look at your funder's policy on research data. So again, on our website, on research data management, we have a list of most funders' policies on research data. So please have a look before you apply for a grant. So for instance, let's have a look at BBSRC's definition of research data. Again, it's only an extract to show you the diversity and to show you what they mean by research data. So it's really what validates your research findings. So again, check our list of research funders before you apply for a grant. Now, what is research data management? It's even more difficult to define, I find. So really what we can say is that research data management covers all of the decisions that you make with your research data during your project. So that's from the planning stage of your project, before you apply for a grant, up to the end of the project when you are thinking about the long-term preservation of your research data. So these decisions, they include how you organize your data, how you describe them, what formats you're choosing for them, how you store them, do you share them or not with your collaborators or with people outside of your team, how do you preserve them, how do you cite them, and do you reuse your data or other people's data. So planning ahead for data management is really important. It helps you for many things. So first of all, it's really important to comply with different requirements. I mentioned funders' requirements and UCL's requirements already. There's also legal, ethical, commercial requirements that you have to comply with. It helps you minimize risks, such as losing your data. It does happen, I'm afraid, and we don't want that to happen to you. So it's really important to think about a lot of these issues during your project. It helps you save time later on during your project because you would have anticipated issues that may come up during the project. It helps you to ensure the long-term preservation of your data, and it gives more visibility to your project, your data, and later on, your publications. So I'm going to talk a little bit about different policies. So first, UCL Research Data Policy. I mentioned it already. You will find it on our website on Research Data Management. You have the URL here on the slides. So this policy is quite short to read. Please take the time to read it. It's really important because it really outlines the responsibilities of all of us in UCL, whether we are research students, staff, academics, part-time, full-time, it doesn't matter. It also guides you on how to care for your data and how to preserve them. So what the UCL policy says is that your research data should be preserved for at least 10 years. It recommends that you use a data management plan. So I don't know if any of you have already used data management plans. I've already heard about them. Okay, that's fine, because I'm going to speak about it in a few minutes. And also, if possible, share your data. So there are other relevant UCL policies. So there's the data protection policy. I don't know if it's relevant for you, but if you are using personal data, that's a really important policy. There's the statement on research integrity. You will find it on the research integrity website. There's policies about your intellectual property rights. So there's one policy for students and one for staff. And there's a publication policy which says that you have to publish your articles and books in Discovery, as Catherine mentioned. Now, most funders have a research data policy. They change it as well. So it's really important to check our website because we update our list of policies every month. So you will find the most up-to-date version of the policy. So please really, again, before you apply for a grant, have a look at our website for the latest version of your funders policy. So let's have a look at EPSRC's expectation on data management. I think that's the most relevant for most of you. So what do they say? That's only a summary. In your pending publications, you should include a data access statement. So it explains how the data that you have used to write this article can be accessed. So it's like a reference, really. Like you are referencing other articles, other books, you're just writing a reference for your own data. So on our website, you will find examples to help you to write this kind of statements. So please have a look at our website for that. Now, if we have a look at your research data, so EPSRC only gives you guidelines for research data that underpin your publications and research data that will be useful for further research. So they're not very nice because they don't really say how do you choose what will be useful in the future. So I'm going to say it's up to you to decide what will be relevant for future researcher. So these research data, at least the one that you are using for your publications, they have to be securely stored for 10 years. So you can choose in which repository, but 10 years. They have to be easy to share. So if they are non-digital data, you can digitize them. Thirdly, metadata. So I don't know if all of you know what metadata are. So that's really information about your research data, really basic information. So metadata should indicate what data exists and give really some basic information on any restrictions to share data. If possible, they should include a digital object identifier, so that's a permanent URL, if you want, that enables you to locate your research data. Finally, EPSRC really strongly recommends you to use a data management plan, especially to anticipate any costs associated with data storage and data archiving. So again, it's only a summary. We have written full guidance for any of you who are funded by EPSRC, so please, again, have a look at our website. You will find the full guidance. So I thought I would give you a flavor of other policies, other funders. So if we look at MRC and Wellcome Trust, for instance, so they also have expectations in terms of data management. So what they want is that whenever possible, you share your data at the end of your project, and especially the data that you've used in your publication. So pretty much like EPSRC. Again, they want you to archive safely your data for at least 10 years. And they also want you to write a data management plan. But for MRC and Wellcome Trust, you don't have the choice. So when you are applying for a grant, you have a section for a data management plan. So you'll find more policies and help on our website again. So that includes help for funders such as Royal Academy, BBSRC, European Commission, etc. Again, these policies change, and the funders don't tell us when they're going to change them. So we do the job for you. We check every month if the funder have changed the policy. So again, check our website before you apply for a grant.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
There are several groups in computer science that their research data does contain personally identifiable information.
Yes.
That comes under the Data Protection Act.
Yes.
Now that's in direct conflict
Yes.
with keeping it the 10 years, and we've always insisted that they're securely encrypted and they are deleted as soon as possible.
Yes.
Certainly not kept 10 years. So
Yes.
what do you do with the EPSRC and similar research councils that say keep it 10 years?
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so the question is about, can we have any restrictions to share some data? Do the funders accept that we can't share everything? Of course they do. Now the default position is that whenever you can, share your data. But they accept that there are lots of very good reasons for not sharing data, and sometimes you do have to destroy your data. That's just part of your research and part of your research domain and the way you work. But what they want is that you explain any exceptions. So when you write a data management plan, for instance, you will have to say, yes, some of my data will probably have to be destroyed for this and these reasons, because of the Data Protection Act, for confidentiality reasons, for commercial reasons. It does happen. So what they want is that you explain any potential restrictions, but they do accept them, of course. That would be impossible otherwise to do research, right? So, yes, absolutely. So it's part of the Yes, absolutely. So it's part of the UCL Research Data Policy. I have a few copies if you want to have a look. It does say that whenever possible, share your data, but if you have good reasons for not sharing them, that's absolutely fine, of course. Right, so I mentioned a few times data management plans. So what is that? So really, this is a summary of what you're going to do with your data during your project. So this summary helps you to identify the decisions that I mentioned earlier about what are you going to do with your data during the project. So even if your funder doesn't want you to write one, or even if you're self-funded, for instance, for PhD students, it can be very useful to write one because it helps you think ahead about the different issues that you may have with managing your data during your project. So it's a very, very useful short document to write. So most funders require them now, and we expect that more and more funders will require them. And again, UCL recommends you to write one whenever possible. So what is it? It's usually a 1 to 2 page summary, pretty short, that says what type of data you will collect, how you will store them, and how they can be accessed at the end of your project, if appropriate, again. So really, it's usually 3 key questions. So we have written a how-to guide to help you write this kind of plan. So again, check our website, and you will find help. We are adding more and more examples of real-life data management plans from projects which got the funding. So please have a look. We are adding more and more examples like that. I'm happy to review your plans as well. So if you contact me, let's say 2 weeks before the deadline of your grant application, I'm happy to have a look at your draft, just to send you my comments. If you're really stuck, if you really don't know how to start, I'm also happy to come to your office. We sit down for 1 hour and we have a look at what your funder expects you to write in such a plan. So don't hesitate to contact me, whether you're an academic, a member of staff, or whether you're a student. It's really good practice for PhD students, for instance, at the end of their first year, to sit down and write such a plan so that they can anticipate what will they do with their data during their project. So don't hesitate. I'm also happy to have a look at drafts written by students, even master students. That's really fine. Now, last part. So I'll explain what are the UCL services available for you to help you with that big question of data management, because we all know that you're really busy, you don't have the time with all of that. So we are really here to help you avoid losing too much time with these policies and this question about storage, etc. So we are really here for that. So your key point of information is really the new website. So it was released 9 months ago, so it's still pretty new. It's normal if you don't know about it. So you have the URL here again. So on the data management website, you will find everything about funders and UCL policies related to research data, information about data management plans, as I already said. We have written a lot of how-to guides to help you with questions such as preservation, formats, copyrights, etc. We will add more and more, so please have a look, because it's really helpful throughout your project. We also have put some resources if you want to share information about data management with your students, with your colleagues. Please have a look. And we have a list of FAQs as well. They're growing, so we will add more and more. Now, what are your options to store your data? So when I say store your data, I mean when you are still working on them, when you are still using them during your project. So in UCL, I don't know if all of you know about that, we have the UCL Research Data Storage Facility. So it's run by ISD, the IT department. So if you're about to start a project or you are currently working on a project and you need data storage, you can use that service. So it gives you up to 5 terabytes of storage for free. So it's per project. It's available to any member of staff at UCL, so it's worth knowing. If you need more than 5 terabytes of storage, please contact my colleagues in the research data storage team, and they are happy to discuss your needs. But it's really important to know that it's available for you in UCL. If you are working on personal sensitive data, then again you should use encryption, or you should use the UCL Data Safe Haven, which is a very highly secured environment. Again, there's guidance available. Now, when you're coming towards the end of your project and you need to think about archiving data and giving access to data for all of the reasons that I mentioned earlier, so you can use UCL Discovery. So Catherine just spoke about Discovery for publications, but it's good to know that you can also use that for your data. So it helps you to make publicly accessible small-scale data sets that are underpinning your publications. So again, there's guidance available. Please have a look. For larger data sets, there's an ISD pilot project at the moment. So my colleagues in ISD are working on a larger archive facility, which will be ready soon, hopefully. Also, it's quite common that your funder or your publisher recommends you to use a data repository because it's relevant to your research field or for any other reason. So have a look again at what your funder or your publisher recommends. And finally, you can also use discipline-specific repositories. So any data repository that you know are used in your research community, that you know your colleagues are likely to use, that's also relevant. So here I've just written on the slide a website which is very useful. You'll find the URL there. So it enables you to find all data repositories in the world in any discipline. It's a very useful website. So please have a look if you're not sure about, or if your funder doesn't recommend anything, for instance. Now, just to finish with the different questions that you have to think about during your project. So of course, ethics is really important. It may not be relevant for all of you, but it's still something that you have to wonder about before you start your project. So there's help for ethical questions in UCL. So there's the Research Ethics Committee that I guess you may know. We have written a guide on how to handle sensitive or personal data. Please have a look if it's relevant for you or your colleagues. The research integrity website is really important as well. Gives you information about ethics, but also about research collaboration, for instance. If you're working with different institutions or with charities or other funders, you'll find information on that website. If you have questions about research contracts, it's good to know that there's a UCL Research Contract Office. So it helps you negotiate contracts with charities or industries, for instance. So it's very useful. Finally, any question that you may have about copyright, please have a look at the website here. So it's run by the library, and there's lots of information. There's a very useful blog, for instance, that answers to lots of questions about copyright. And questions about information security, again, please have a look at the website mentioned there. So just to conclude, before I take any questions, so I'm available to answer any inquiries that you may have, any questions about data management in general, whether it's tomorrow or in 6 months. Don't hesitate to send me an email if you're not sure about your funders policy, about how to share your data. If you have any question, even if it's about copyright, I won't be able to answer the copyright one, but I know the expert in UCL who can answer. So don't hesitate to ask me a question. Yes, there's one already.
If I understand correctly,
yeah.
There is no long-term archival option for terabyte scale datasets?
In UCL?
In UCL.
Yes, okay, so the question is about long-term archiving for large volume of data. So at the moment, there's no facility in UCL for that. That's right. My colleagues are working on that at the moment in the IT department, but there's none at the moment. That's why I gave you a list of other options, because we know you need them right now. So we will let you know once it's ready, of course. We will know all departments, but at the moment, that's right, there's none. Yeah. So I'm available to answer inquiries. I'm available to review your data management plans. Again, don't hesitate to send me an email. I'm happy to help with that. I'm also happy to come and have a chat with you, with your team, if you feel that you have more questions about data management. Again, I'm happy to come in your office and just have a chat. And so don't hesitate. Have you got any questions now? Yes.
Yeah, again about what big data needs to be stored. So in many areas in computer science, we're analyzing big data sets.
Yes.
But we haven't created or created, but they are coming from somewhere else. Do we have to store them as a copy?
You have, so the question is, what do you do with large volume of data that sometimes you are...
We're just using them store the original data set in our own copy?
So again, so that's the question about what do we do with large volume of data that we want to analyze for our project, right? Whether you have created them or not, even if you are reusing someone else's data, right? So just as good practice, you need to back them up because you don't want to lose this data because you are working on them. So yes, you need to have a copy somewhere. So at least in your department, it has to be secured. I'm afraid that you couldn't use the research data storage facility for that because you can only use it for data over which you have copyright. So you couldn't store someone else's data on that with that facility. Okay. So sorry, it's not very clear. The UCL Research Data Storage, that's a storage facility that you can only use if you have created the data, if you have the rights over the data. Okay, so if you are using someone else's data that you are processing and analyzing, you couldn't use that facility. So in that case, if you are using someone else's data, you have to create a backup copy of the data on your server in your department. Okay, so just to avoid losing them. Is that clear?
Yeah, but that's with the large data sets.
Yeah.
I'm guaranteeing them for 10 years in our department, with our own solution. I don't think that is a very option. UCL has to do something about that.
Okay, okay. Okay, so the question again is because you are handling very large volume of data, and that's not possible. Okay.
Even, let's say, even if the research center, the data center,
yes,
would not have copyright on them,
yeah.
but those data sets are most of the time larger than those 5 terabytes.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. So again, it's the question of large volume of data. How do we handle them? So again, my colleagues are working on that. So I'm afraid at the moment there's no solution in UCL for that. But my colleagues are working on that, and they are very much aware that there's a big need in UCL. So I think that's all I could say at the moment. They are working on it at the moment. Is that an answer?
Okay.
Any other question? Yes? Is it linked to your publications, or is it linked to research data, do you think? For publications, for articles? Okay, so maybe I'll just check if there's any question about research data, and if not, then I'll just ask Tom to speak a little bit about research IT services. Any question about data management or research data, research storage? Okay, so I'll just, maybe Catherine, you want to answer the question?
What we
and then.
Do is we can look at RPS in a bit more detail right at the end after Tom's spoken, if that's all right.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll just ask Tom to come and speak a bit about research IT services and how they can help you with your project.
Thank you. Hello, my name's Tom Couch, and I'm a facilitator for the Research IT Services Department. Probably most of you have heard of us, but maybe not everything that we do, so hopefully this will be informative. The remit of the Research IT Services Department is to provide IT services specifically for research, so it doesn't include things like email or printing. And we're not the only people who provide services which support research, and we don't provide every service which supports research. But there are 4 main areas in which we do operate. First of all, our research IT applications team. This group you probably will never meet because they provide the back-end support for a lot of the services that support the management of research, like RPS, IRIS, the Research Equipment Catalogue, which allows you to search for equipment which other people have within UCL and you may be able to use. Not included in that list is a project which is ongoing at the moment called PAGS, the Pre-Award Grant System, which is going to replace PFACT for putting your grant applications together. We also have a research software development group. They used to do a free call for short projects to help anyone who writes code to speed it up, refactor it, port it from one system to another. But that's on pause at the moment. But what you can do is put a cost into a grant application to recruit this team to help you with any software development needs that you might have if you know you're going to have them in your project. They work broadly across UCL. I think we've worked with 8 out of 10 faculties so far. But the ethos is to bring the best of commercial software engineering skills to research software developed by academics. As well as the development effort, they also provide some infrastructure services, which include, well, it used to include GitHub, but GitHub changed their policies, so now it's easier for any academic to get their own repository. But if you have commercially sensitive code, we have a GitHub Enterprise server in UCL where you can store your code and use the version control system to collaborate with your team. And another service that they provide is called Jenkins. It's a continuous integration and testing service. So if you are working on your code, you make a change in your repository in GitHub or Subversion, Jenkins will automatically run whatever tests you've written on that code and send you an email if you've broken your code. And finally, that team run a lot of training courses, including software carpentry. We're looking into a new data carpentry course, and software engineering with C++ at the moment. But the exact courses change. Okay. Then we have our research computing platform service. There are 3 computing platforms at UCL which are free for any researcher to use. You just need to apply for an account. So we have Legion, which is a heterogeneous collection of nodes of various ages and sizes. But the aim is to transform that over the next year or 2 years into a more data-intensive, high-throughput system. Grace, which was launched in December, is our new platform for parallel jobs, so it supports MPI jobs. At the moment, it has 181 teraflops, but we're going to double its capacity to about 350, I think, over the next year. And finally, Emerald is a general-purpose GPU system, which we share with various consortium of universities in the southeast. But universities, UCL have a large allocation of resources there. Again, there's training available. If you're new to cluster computing, we provide an introduction to high performance and high throughput computing course. And finally, the research data service. Miriam's introduced pretty much everything I was going to talk about here, but yeah, the research data storage service is for live project data. You can get up to 5 terabytes, but you can request more. There is no charge for it at the moment. there may be a charge in future, but it will not be applied retrospectively. The Research Data Archive service, we know it's a big need across the university. We have a new head of our Research Data Storage service, and he is making it a big priority for the coming year. And we work very closely with Miriam as well, and try to provide any advice and consultancy you might need regarding managing your data. So that's a brief overview of the Research IT Services Department. You can find us on the internet at UCL/RITS, or email RITS@UCL, and that'll come through to me or my colleague Joe, and we can refer you on to whatever you need. We try to, although we don't provide every service, we try to help as far as we can, or we try to know as much as we can about all the other services at UCL which may be able to help you. So do feel free to get in touch if you have any queries about anything to do with your projects that you don't have a solution for at the moment. Okay, great, thank you. Any questions? Yeah.
The head of Research Data Services, do you think they might be interested in speaking to researchers about needs, or do you think they already have a good sense of what it is that they might best do?
Well, we did a big survey over the past 2 months about Research IT Services, and we did get quite a lot of good feedback about that. And so I've passed that on to our new head, and he'll be looking at that. But if you do have any comments, if anyone has any comments about the requirements, that's part of my job. Let me know, and I'll feed it back. So yeah, all comments are welcome.
Well, but in that, I don't know if I just had a look at the Research Data Store. Actually, no, it was a comment that Miriam made about owning the copyright of data that you archive. That's a very harsh constraint. So the feedback would be
okay
around allowing for a wider.
Yeah. I'm afraid that it's not something I really know much about at the moment, but I will make a note to look into that. Yeah, because I don't know if that applies to CC BY license stuff or not. Yeah. Any other questions about Research IT Services? Okay.
Has anyone got any questions related to open access or research data management? I think, yeah. Question about open access.
Thanks. Hi, yeah.
So, I have a paper that you attended at the conference, and so I logged into RPS, and I manually create a record of it, and I uploaded the PDF. And then 6 or 7 months down the line, I got an automatic notification from RPS identifying that I got a new publication, which is actually the official record for it. And usually there is much more information about it, so the venue publication, page numbers, and so on. And most of the time, what I would like is for the dummy entry I created to automatically be reconciled and for the PDF to transfer over.
That's what should happen. It depends. The types have to be the same, so it would have to be a conference and a conference, or a journal article and a journal article. There is an algorithm that tries to do that. It doesn't always succeed. You can merge the two records manually. There is a way to do it if you want to.
Manually is not a big concern, so long as the system notifies me that there's possibly another entry which is the same. So my point is there an automatic flag that says there is this new publication and I think this is actually duplicate of. I'm not talking about the automatic reconciliation.
As far as I know, there isn't an automatic notification to say this is the same as something that's already there, or might be.
Do you have a sense of what is the information that I should really care about to make sure that it is identified as an So for application type, I get it. Title, I guess it's the same. It is enough for the system where...
Is it enough? Sorry, I haven't mentioned what the question is. The question is about entering data in RPS about publications and where there's perhaps a need to merge two publications that are the same. So are you asking about what data is really sort of important to add in a manual record?
Yeah, I guess that my point is that so far I never entered the manual in RPS. So
No.
just wait.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Comply with this policy.
Yes.
I foresee the opposite. I will always have to enter data manually.
That's right.
I will always be notified down the line that there is
Yeah.
change.
Yeah.
So I think that in the future we have to do a lot of these reconciliations.
Yeah, I mean, it should, as I say, it should merge automatically. But yes, as far as sort of key data to enter, I think conference title. I mean, if we're talking about conferences, conference title, date accepted, date, approximate date of publication, that type of thing. And then, yes, as you say, title of the conference paper and your relationship. So it's going to be fairly straightforward. I mean, there are some. The form at the moment is not. It includes mandatory fields, but they're not all squashed up together. And that's what we're going to try to do, is to reorganize them so that it's a little bit easier to see what's critical and what isn't. But there are mandatory fields that it won't let you proceed without having entered. So, yeah. Are they all, has anybody got any questions that aren't related to my talk? Okay, then. Right. Put your hands up then. Yeah.
I can clarify my question from earlier. So the question was, with green open access, how many copies can authors share in other places? So I had a look at the ACM copyright transfer agreement and the publishing license agreement. Both of them allow to publish on the publisher's site, the author's homepage, the institutional repository. They don't speak about additional third-party repositories.
No. So you're talking about things like ResearchGate, or yeah. We would discourage you from using sites like ResearchGate anyway, because they're not repositories as such. They're commercial social networking sites, and there's no sort of there's no control over what's deposited, over control of over copyright compliance or not. Basically, they're interested in promoting a commercial product, gathering details of authors, and they're not there for long-term storage. Archive. What does ACM allow? Does it include subject repositories?
I don't think so.
Because I'd be very, very surprised.
One, author's homepage. 2, the owner's institutional repository. 3, any repository legally mandated by an agency funding the research.
Okay. In that case, I think we need to look again at that in a bit more detail, because, yeah, it does surprise me that they don't mention subject repositories, and it could just be an oversight on their part. So, yeah, if you drop me a line, I'll have a look at that. Yeah. Anything else? Yeah.
Does the ESRC provide funds for open access?
ESRC, yes. So all the research councils do, so ESRC is included in that. Yeah.
Right, because I just had a paper published, paper accepted, and the gold open access is $5,000.
Yeah.
So, I mean, how do I access?
If you send us an email or fill in on our web, I'll just go to our web pages quickly. On our web pages, there's, if I can get a browser somewhere, no. Okay, on our web pages, there's a contact us link, and you'll find there both our email address and a form that you can fill in with details about the paper, which kind of asks you the sort of things that we're likely to ask when we get your email. So things like who's the funder, details of the paper, and that sort of thing. So if you just fill that in and send it off to us, then we'll reply with details of what needs to happen next, depending on the publisher and that kind of thing.
Is there any limit to the amount of funds that you can...
Not at the moment, no. I mean, it wasn't completely spent for last year. So, yeah, there's still... We're waiting for a new award for this year. They've been very slow to announce institutions' allocations, but there's no suggestion that the funds won't be available. So, no, at the moment, we haven't had to limit it.
Right. So, yeah. I mean, is that money in place at the moment?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
From hundreds of researchers that we have at UCL, we got today only, I don't know, 20 or 30. That means that there is a kind of a huge, actually the majority of the researchers they don't give a lot of attention to all these policies.
Yep.
And I think it's kind of a huge workload for something that we shouldn't really bother. So I think that all these kind of things, they should be not thrown to the researcher, and it should be made from the librarians or from the funders themselves. My question is, why should we kind of take all this workload? Why is something that is not really our work? Our work is to produce the research, not to really kind of bother about if it will be open access or not.
Well, the straight answer to that is that the higher education funding councils are funding UCL's research. And in the case of the research councils where they're providing grants, they are funding UCL's research. And it is their requirement that researchers do this. And they want researchers to do this. They are not, they know that there are certain automated solutions that in the future might help, but their specific policy is to require researchers to do this. Well, the policy has just started. We are doing a lot. We are having a lot of these conversations with researchers and have been for a couple of years. So there is a question about how we're going to get to 100%. But the danger is that you will be one of those researchers who is penalised and isn't able to put your research into the ref. I can't really say any more than that. I mean, if you want not to do it and risk that, then that's your risk. But for the sake of the time that it will take to do it, it seems to be sensible for you to comply, actually.
This is what I'm doing, and this is why I'm here.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty sure that there is a very large number of researchers that they will not bother.
Well, and that's something where we will have to say to HEFCE when it comes to 2021, look, we've done our best to try and explain these requirements to researchers. We've been out to talk to them. We've provided, I mean, I was talking to Sarah earlier about providing reporting and compliance statistics to the department to try and raise levels of compliance, because ultimately, if researchers aren't doing this at acceptance, we need to chase them to do it later on. The problem with all of this, of course, is that we don't know what you're publishing. I mean, this is the issue with RPS and these systems more generally. We don't know what you're publishing when you're publishing it. You're the only ones who do know. So,
the publisher knows too.
Well,
so
as I said before,
go after is the publisher, not the
well, as I said before, in answer to that gentleman's question, there are attempts being made to get manuscripts out of publishers at acceptance, and there are all sorts of requirements or all sorts of kind of technical infrastructure that needs to happen in order to do that. First of all, there needs to be agreement with all the publishers, and at the moment, a number of publishers are helping and some aren't. And this is not something that needs to happen on a UCL level. This needs to happen on a national level, if not an international level. We need to get DOIs through on acceptance rather than on publication so that we know what's being published earlier. We need to know which researchers are associated with those DOIs, and that needs to happen through researchers getting ORCIDs. So if you know about ORCID, if you've got an ORCID, wonderful. If you haven't, talk to me about it afterwards. So there is a massive effort going on amongst...
Probably it's less than putting all the research to do the job.
Yeah, the problem is that there is no, as I said before, there's no infrastructure to fix it at the moment. And I personally, and my team of, well, we're getting more staff to support this, but my team of maybe 7 or 8 people is not in a position to manage 12,000 papers and get manuscripts that we don't know about. So, I mean, I've sat in meetings with HEFCE where they've said, you know, we deliberately and actively want researchers to do this because we want them to understand how important it is, and we want them to see open access as a critical part of their research workflows. So, you know, as I and all my colleagues say on the list, don't shoot the messenger, because we're just here to tell you, you know, to bring the message to you.
No, we don't shoot it.
Yeah.
Why have all the funders gone down the gold route rather than the green route? Because it's expensive and it makes a two-tier system. So some of us aren't funded by BBSRC or other ones. And so we're at a disadvantage if you get more for your bucks.
Yeah.
And I wonder whether they thought about that what it would
Well, I mean, it's certainly something that's been raised a lot. There was a report a few years ago which recommended gold, a government report, and that was what led to the Research Council's policy. The reason that, and that was what led to gold, there's been no indication that the Research Councils will change that preference. Whether they can carry on funding to the level that they are, I mean, we don't know. We can only work with what we've been told. It does create a two-tier system, I suppose. I think that ultimately the aim, I mean, it's difficult to predict what will happen. It's impossible to predict what will happen in, 10 years, 20 years in open access and scholarly communication and research communication more generally. We might see a system, and one thing I should have mentioned before is that there is one publisher for whom it's not a two-tier system, and that's Springer, because Springer has a deal that will allow all UCL authors to publish gold. So that's a new deal for this year. So if you're publishing in a Springer journal, you go gold, and it's covered under UCL's, effectively under our subscription agreement. We might see more of that. We hope to see publishers flipping subscription deals so that there isn't this sort of double payment for gold. But what HEFCE couldn't really do was to fund gold for everything. I mean, immediate open access at the point of use, wherever it is, seems to be the most sensible thing. But there are different ways of getting there. And there is an argument that the green way is something that will ultimately lead to a fairer system for everyone, but it's not something that's there yet. So I agree, it's not perfect at the moment, and I can't say what the funders will do, but at the moment it is as it is. Yeah. Anything else? Yeah.
So you said that this policy just came into effect now, right? So from now on we need to do that. So what about the papers from before? Can they go into red?
Yeah, yes they can. Yes they can. If you want to upload them, you can, but you don't have to. Yeah, yeah.
We've got a few new colleagues who join us from institutions overseas.
Yeah.
What do you recommend they do almost as soon as they get here?
I mean, it's related to the previous question in that I mean, our priority very much is papers accepted after the 1st of April. So they can upload all their old papers, but I wouldn't recommend necessarily that they do. If they're joining in subsequent years, I would say get in touch with us. We wouldn't necessarily, I mean, there is an exception which we need to look at. We need to look at how we'll apply this, because again, it's part of how the systems measure this and how they record this. But there's an exception for for new people coming from institutions where there isn't a repository and where they haven't complied. If they have complied at their previous institution, then we can record that. But I think it's something that we sort of have to take on a case-by-case basis and maybe look at what the individual researcher has published and record that in RPS as necessary. I mean, the first thing they'll need to do is set up their RPS record and make sure that it's kind of recording subsequent papers. But I wouldn't be too concerned about the previous papers. Yeah. Yeah.
So I came from another institution, and when I arrived, they made an automatic search, and it found like 90% of my papers, some double, some different date. So I left it there, and then, as Misha said, the most recent publications I had to enter manually.
Yeah.
And then I went through straightening all the old ones, and there, I mean, a few, how do you say, edges of RPS became clear.
Yeah.
So, for instance, when you enter something manually or you want to correct it, you can choose between journal paper or journal article, book chapter, I think easy enough, or conference. But the conference can be published either as a book chapter or as a special issue.
Yes.
In the journal. So I personally eventually decided not to use conferences. Then there are hybrid publications which have both an ISBN, so they are both a book chapter, but they are part of a series. So they also have an ISSN and could be classified as a journal article.
Yeah.
And there I took the decision that I would consider it a book chapter rather than, but I mean there are all sorts of arbitrary choices which everybody will decide on its own result in a database which is somehow, I don't want to say inconsistent, but sort of messy.
I can see that, and I think it's probably impossible for us to give sort of guidance that applies across the board, because different disciplines probably approach these things in different ways, and there will be different types of publication in different disciplines that would be considered a journal article or a book chapter or whatever. So I'm not sure that it's necessarily useful to have something that's kind of set in stone. But I can see the need for some guidance, and particularly there's the need for guidance on what's included in the ref policy and what isn't, and what they've said about those sorts of publications, about publications that have both ISBNs and ISSNs, for instance, is that they would like them to comply. They feel that it would be appropriate for them to comply, but if it's not possible, then they need not. So I agree that that's a difficult area. I'll look into how I might frame some guidance and what we might do, because what's on the web pages is not wonderful. Would you be willing either to give me some examples, or just to pop down and give me your name so that I can have a look at your RPS profile and see what sorts of publications we're talking about? That would be really helpful. Okay, thank you. I'm sorry I don't have a clear answer at the moment, but yeah. Anything else? Yeah. No, because they're offering you gold. They'll be offering you gold paid open access. And unless you're funded, or unless there's funding available, then no. I mean, the only exception would be fully open access journals, where you'd always be paying a charge anyway. And in that case, providing the corresponding author is at UCL, we can make the payment for you. So that would be a sort of special situation. Yeah. Anything else?
You mentioned that I work in a department where that does actually
okay.
welcome trust funding. So how does their open access policy differ versus the Research Council?
Yeah, so the Wellcome Trust Open Access Policy is very similar to the Research Council's policy. There's an even stronger preference for gold. So provided that the journal offers the right license, the CC BY license, and provided they meet the other conditions. There's one other condition to do with depositing the paper in PubMed Central. So provided they do that, then we will make the payment. So the thing to do would just be to drop us a line when you've had something accepted, and we can sort out the payment. Yeah. Yeah.
If the publisher doesn't offer this, it's a conference that they don't bother about open access.
You mean if they don't offer gold open access? Yes. I mean, you're not going to be going for gold. Well, you mean if you're funded?
It's a conference that there are many conferences that they don't kind of deal with policies of open access.
Do you mean if you're funded and you need to comply with your funder's policy, but there's no gold option? Yes. Yeah, then you would go green. You would deposit it, and depending on your funder's requirement, you might deposit it in a different place. But yeah.
Yeah. Just to make sure what green is.
Yep.
After it's accepted, within 3 months we upload it with all the details.
Yes.
That's it.
Yes. Okay. If you think of anything else, or you have any questions that aren't covered on the website or we haven't covered here, then please do let me know. As I say, we'll be having a chat separately about how we can monitor this and provide you with what support we can. Yeah, good luck for all of us. Thank you very much.
So 1st of April is the kind of date that we have to...
Anything accepted after 1st of April, yeah.